Hi everyone. I am back for our Fireside chat this week, and the topic that we have this week is definitely an interesting one and one that has been a bit inflammatory this past week. I was on vacation, and so I did not immediately respond to it, and I also don't like to respond to anything immediately. My kids know this about me. I like to have time to really think through things. And because I've discovered that sometimes the way I take things isn't how they're meant, or I don't fully process everything very quickly, and so I like to give myself the benefit of time. I want to start out by telling you where I personally stood with regards to vaccines and autism, and then I want to respond to RFK Jr.'s press conference and some things that I've learned this past week. So, my opinion on the cause of autism has pretty much always been that it is likely caused by a variety of different things that have disrupted development early in life. Pretty simple and basic. Because we know that with autism, development is atypical, and so something has caused that to be atypical. Whether it's a genetic condition, exposure to something, we don't know. And there is no defining feature within the autism criteria that says what it would be. So we know at least some cases are definitely genetic because we have proved that certain genetic conditions directly result in autism. We also suspect that many more are genetic, given how it tends to run in families. We also know that people with Ehlers-Danlos have a 740% chance of having autism. And we've already identified at least one gene contributing to Ehlers-Danlos whose expression is influenced by your environment. So, therefore, my understanding has been that some people diagnosed as autistic have variations in their genes that could be influenced by the environment and cause disruptions in development. Those all seem like possibilities, especially given my experience with me and our kids all having Ehlers-Danlos. I have never believed that vaccines cause autism directly. However, after Wednesday's press conference, I did a little digging, and I have definitely been surprised by some of the things I found. And I will share that in a little bit. But let's start with the press conference. RFK Jr. said some things that upset a lot of people. Things like, this is an individual tragedy as well. Autism destroys families. More importantly, it destroys our greatest resource, which is our children. There are children who should not be, these are children who should not be suffering like this. These are kids who will never pay taxes, who will never hold a job, who will never play baseball, who will never write a poem. They will never go out on a date. Many of them will never use a toilet unassisted. Many have been quick to point out, well, I have a job and pay taxes and I'm autistic. And that was kind of my first response too. And I understand where that's coming from because we don't want others limiting us. However, I also feel like this is a very dangerous response. At some of the worst times in history for autistics, our value has been determined based on what we could contribute to society. But your worth as an individual does not come from what you do. Rather, it comes from who you are. These comments are hurtful because they emphasize what we can and cannot do. Why not just say, we suspect that some autistic children may not feel well inside based on signs of inflammation, and we want to make sure that they have the best support possible to be at their best. I think that would be a much more humanizing way to approach that. However, I will also say his press conference made other families feel more seen. Families with children with severe developmental delays, families who have noticed changes in their children after exposure to some kind of an environmental factor. These are families that very often do not feel heard, and there needs to be a place for everyone at the table. Autistic pride must be balanced with an ongoing search for supports that will allow all of us to live our best lives. It's not that autism destroys families. It is the lack of support that destroys families. It is extremely expensive to raise an autistic child. Ask me, I know. And it can be very isolating. Either because other people don't live the same life you do, or because sometimes they make judgments without having walked a mile in your shoes. It's up to us to make the decision that we as a society are going to create change, to create a more inclusive world. And yes, we have some big things up in the air that could change the face of the supports we currently have. Since the press conference, I have been made aware of some of the claims that RFK Jr. has made about the research on autism and vaccines. He claims that they never compared vaccinated to unvaccinated kids. The studies they did were very, very narrow. None of the vaccines given to children in the first 6 months of life were ever studied. So I decided to go to Google Scholar, pull on my school psychology cap, and go searching through the scientific journals. As a former school psychologist, I'm very familiar with reading and interpreting such studies. And honestly, even though I do not believe that vaccines cause autism, I was shocked, honestly, absolutely shocked, that RFK Jr. isn't completely wrong on some of his claims. He's not completely right, but he's not completely wrong either. In the research that people claim confirms no causal link between vaccines and autism, very few studies compare vaccinated children and unvaccinated children. I only found 2, and one of them wasn't even focused at autism. Many studies had conflicting results, and many vaccines haven't been studied at all for a relationship to autism. Personally, as a scientist, I was appalled by the lack of due diligence in putting this concern to bed. There were some vaccines that there were no studies on regarding a relationship to autism, and it seems like the vast majority of the research that has been done on autism and vaccines has been done on the MMR vaccine. And I only found 2 studies in all the studies I looked at this week that compared vaccinated kids to unvaccinated kids, and one of those wasn't even about autism. It is not that this shows that vaccination has an impact on autism. What it means is that the research has been done poorly, and they have not looked into everything thoroughly enough. It needs to be well done. All of this makes me particularly concerned because I remember professors in graduate school making up research studies without actually doing them, and then getting those research studies published in respected scientific journals. If we expect to be taken seriously as a scientific community, we must do the work if we expect to be trusted. So regardless of what you think that the research should say, the research has not been done thoroughly enough to make the kinds of claims that we've been making on either side. And that research needs to be done, and it needs to be done well, and we need to have replicated studies. All of the variables need to be considered, and they have not been considered, and we cannot make broad brush claims without considering all of the variables and doing the research to back ourselves up no matter which claim we choose to make. So personally, I was just flabbergasted that the research had not been done as thoroughly as I had been led to believe. I fully support doing more research because we should never be afraid of doing research on any topic. Research only serves to provide us with more information that can help us make better decisions. And it really doesn't matter which side of this you're on. whichever side of this you're on, you should want good research to back that up and to be able to, you know, solidly be able to make the claims that are being made on either side. That needs to happen. And quite honestly, autistics deserve to have more information. We deserve to have as much information as possible about how our bodies work. When a brain is not wired up the way everybody else's brain is wired up, your body is not wired up the same way, because our brain is connected to our body and dictates how our body functions. And we deserve to have as much knowledge as possible about how our body functions. So I fully support more research. I found the way that RFK Jr. spoke about autism to be dehumanizing. And I think that that should have been said differently. Autism is not a disease. It is a disorder. It is a broad psychological category. So I can't say that I fully agree with anybody on one side or another. There's definitely things that should not have been said that way. But at the same time, there is real science that needs to be done here, and it hasn't been done. Not to the point that it needs to be done. It takes a long time and many studies to be able to make broad claims about anything in science, especially something that has as many variables as this does. Some of the vaccines in the first 6 months had been studied, but not all of them had. And the ones that had been studied had very few studies that I could find. So those are kind of my thoughts on this. Feel free to put comments, questions in the chat. It's definitely an inflammatory topic. I kind of feel like I'm seeing everybody's side of it. And yes, I mean, vaccines can save lives, but we also know that vaccines can cause side effects for some people. We know that our research on vaccines in some areas is not thorough enough. We also know that how important it is to humanize each other and to make sure that we don't dehumanize groups of people. That leads to terrible consequences in history. So, you know, there's a lot of different variables. Some of us feel seen. Some of us feel dehumanized. And all of those feelings are valid. So if you want to continue this conversation, feel free to put it in the chat. As long as the comments remain respectful, I'll leave comments up. But I won't leave comments up that are hateful or hurtful to anyone, because everybody deserves the opportunity to have their own perspective. And it is only by understanding all of our perspectives that we really have a rich community where everyone gets to feel seen, respected, heard, and supported. So thanks for joining me today. Feel free to take a look at his press conference and to get on Google Scholar and go through some of those research studies yourself. I simply typed in autism vaccines, and then I'd put in a specific vaccine and see what was there. And there were definitely some interesting things available. Some of the researchers were less reputable than others. Others were more reputable, and there were people on both sides. So look at it yourself. See what you think. Thanks for joining me today, guys.